Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Red Pill Garage. Does your car need new coolant? How often should you flush your coolant? What does your coolant exactly do? Do you want to know how to flush your coolant? You can flush it yourself easily. Let me teach you guys how to flush your cooling system properly. If you're wondering when should I flush my coolant, there is no standard interval for flushing coolant, but you should always check with the owner's manual recommendations. And the job of the coolant is to basically keep your car's engine cool in summer and prevent it from freezing in winter, but also prolong the life of your water pump, your head gasket, radiator, and hoses as well. Okay, these are the tools I'll be using on today's job. It's just your basic tools, and just to let you guys know that I'll be replacing all the cooling and heating system hoses, but I won't bore you with that process. Anyone with half a brain can change hoses. There's nothing technical about that process, so that's why I have extra tools out. Okay, now moving on to the radiator flush. You can use any brand of radiator flush, they all do the same job. I also use a little bit of rubber grease for the radiator petcock or the drain plug, and just check your owner's manual for coolant mixing ratios. On this particular Corolla, I'll be using a 50% concentrate coolant and 50% demineralized or distilled water. Now getting back to the radiator flush, I'm going to let you guys onto a little secret that mechanics don't want you to know. If your vehicle has travelled at least 250 or 300,000 kilometres, I strongly recommend that you don't use a radiator flush, because if it loosens up too much mineral scale or rust, it can actually create problems like causing your water pump or radiator to leak. And believe me, you don't want to go down that path. That's an expensive money pit. Okay, this is my cooling system pressure test kit, and that's the actual pressure tester pump that we pressurize the cooling system. And those coloured bands are for different types of vehicles that these adapters fit to. And that gauge there that you see with the blue hose, that's the purge unit where we purge the air out of the system, and those radiator caps are for different applications, different size radiators themselves. And don't forget your safety glasses. Okay, let's get started. The first thing you want to do is make sure your heater's turned on. You can see there it's all the way to hot. Then turn your fan on. And next, you want to start your engine up just for a few seconds, just to activate the heater. And you can see on this vehicle here, on this Corolla, it's done at least 357,000 kilometres, and that's why I won't use a radiator flush, because if you use a radiator flush, you'll be looking for trouble. Okay, next you want to make sure your radiator hoses are cold and your cap, and it feels nice and cold and it's safe to open. Never open it when it's hot because you'll burn yourself. And next you want to locate your radiator petcock or your drain plug. Either going to be on the left side or the right side of the radiator, and then some cars it could be in the middle of the radiator underneath the car, and that's it there. Okay, next you want to place your drip tray underneath the radiator drain plug. You don't want any of that coolant going down the drain. Then unscrew your radiator plug or petcock. Okay, next you want to disconnect your overflow hose to the radiator from the reservoir bottle. And you want to drain the coolant out of that into a container as well. In this particular car, it's actually easier if you just pull the hose down and whatever's in that reservoir will drain out. Now try to avoid to spill anything on the belts themselves, on your serpentine belts, because they can create a squeak if you get any of that coolant on the belts. Then temporarily place the hose back on and fill up the reservoir with water right to the top, and then we're going to re-drain that again. And try not to spill any water on the serpentine belt. Okay, next you want to locate your two heater hoses. You only need to take one off, whichever one is easiest. It doesn't matter which one you take off. Now you'll need to use your hose pick. These hoses can be quite tight to come off, and being an older car, you don't want to disturb too much because you can actually create a problem. If you're yanking on those hoses and those hoses are stuck, you can actually crack the heater in the car and you'll have a coolant leak in the car. So that's why it's always best to use a hose pick, and just make sure you don't puncture that hose. Next, you can refit the radiator cap and the radiator plug, but don't screw the plug in all the way. You want to leave it about 2 or 3 millimeters out. I'll explain later on the reason behind that. Okay, next you want to place your trigger nozzle into the heater hose, and now I'm going to flush out the heater core in the car. You'll see all that old coolant come out. I see that. That looks like an old piece of rubber gasket or piece of silicone from a previous repair. And this is why I like to break into certain parts of the cooling system, because I find this to be the most effective way to get all the crud out of the system. Some guys like to just drain it by the drain plug, refill it, take it for a drive and re-drain it again. But that's just not good enough, and that just proves there, because there's no way that piece of rubber is going to flow out through that radiator drain plug. It's just too big. Okay, once you're satisfied the water's all coming out nice and clean, you want to reverse flush that heater core. Again, you've got a nice clean stream of water coming out there. And don't forget to replace your drip trays under the car so they don't overflow. I found that piece of silicone that came out of that heater core. It was just sitting on top of the transmission. Okay, next I'm going to flush out the opposite side of the cooling system through the radiator. We're pushing the water out through the heater hose. You can see it pulsing like that because it's got air pockets in the system. Now by removing the radiator plug, I'll be draining out the radiator. Then by forcing water through the radiator, it's going to push out whatever sediment is in the bottom of that radiator through the drain plug hole. See, now that's coming out pretty clean. That's the heater hose there, that's coming out pretty clean also. Don't forget to swap out your drip trays. Okay, this is the part here where I end up replacing all 6 hoses. So you've got your 2 heater hoses, your 2 throttle body hoses, and your upper and lower radiator hoses. So I've sped up the video not to bore you guys because it's pretty simple to replace. It just takes time, that's all. And I also end up replacing the PCV valve hose as well because that had a split in it because the hose had gone rock hard. Okay, I've just removed the thermostat and flushed out the engine block via the heater hose. And that's the thermostat there. And that's the little bleeder valve. And you want to make sure that bleeder valve is in the 12 o'clock position because that's how we're going to get our air out of the engine block, because air bubbles rise to the top. And always make sure you replace the thermostat gasket with a new one. That's our thermostat housing. Just make sure you replace your hose clamps. Don't use the same hose clamp twice, especially on older cars like this. On goes the heater hose. Now that all the hose clamps are tight, do you guys remember when I said earlier not to screw the drain plug in all the way? That's because if it goes in dry, there's a good chance the O-ring could tear, causing a coolant leak and throwing your money and coolant down the drain. Only use your fingers to tighten up the drain plug. Do not use any tools because it's made out of plastic and you will break it. Then once you've done that, you can now refit the overflow hose to the radiator from the reservoir bottle. Okay, this is a purge unit that I use. Now you don't need to go out and buy one. This is just a quicker way of purging the air out of the system. That's the feed hose that I'm going to put into the coolant jug to suck the coolant through. And that's the purge hose where we suck the air out of the system. And that's the shop air connected to the purge unit. And you'll see the hoses, they'll start to suck themselves inwards. Turn it on. Start the purge process. So that top radiator hose, how it's sucking itself inwards. This doesn't cause any damage whatsoever. We're just creating a vacuum. That vacuum we've now created is sucking the coolant into the engine. We want to pass fluid into the engine. In this case, it's coolant, not air. Like I said, you guys don't need to go out and buy this. It's just a quicker way of purging the air out of the system. You definitely need to purge the air out either way, because if you don't and you take the car for a drive, more than likely the car will overheat on you. And you can see those hoses now starting to relax. And like I said, this doesn't cause any damage whatsoever. Okay, it looks like we've run out of vacuum now. What I'm going to do now is connect up the spill-free funnel adapters. Clamp off the overflow hose, because we want to get as much coolant as we can into that radiator, not into the overflow bottle. Okay, next I'm going to pour in the remainder of that coolant from the jug. You want to get as much coolant as possible into that radiator. Then what you want to do is squeeze that top radiator hose, or even the bottom radiator hose. It doesn't make any difference. And by doing this, you're going to be purging out any air out of the system, and you'll see bubbles come through the spill-free funnel. And in this case, we don't see any bubbles at the moment. Then the remainder of that can go into the radiator reservoir bottle. Okay, on the radiator cap it says 88 kPa, which roughly translates to about 13 psi. And now I'm going to pressurize the cooling system to make sure we have no coolant leaks anywhere. It's a good idea to do this because when you disturb the cooling system on an older vehicle with that many Ks on the clock, you can actually create a problem, so you have to be extra careful. Okay, 13 psi. Okay, we're just going to leave that alone. And what we're going to do next is have a quick sticky beak around to make sure we have no coolant leaks anywhere at all. We're still at 13 psi. She's looking pretty good. There's no leaks, it hasn't lost any pressure. Okay, now I'm going to safely release the pressure out of the cooling system pressure tester. Fit the radiator cap on and the engine beauty cover. Okay, next, this last step is really important because you must let the engine run until the radiator fans come on. But you also need to make sure they kick in and out at least a couple of times. If the fans stay on, that means the engine will overheat and you'll probably notice the heater in the car will be blowing cold air and not hot air. But the temperature gauge will not tell you if the engine is overheating because the sensor will only work if it's submerged in coolant, not air pockets. So if you suspect it's overheating because the radiator fans are staying on, you need to shut the engine off for about an hour and then try again, and then she'll be right to drive. And the next couple of days, just monitor the coolant level as it may require a minor top-up with water. And that's it, guys. That's how you correctly perform a cooling system flush. And if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button not to miss out on any future videos. And I'll see you in the next episode of Red Pill Garage. Thank you for watching.